Chapter 7 of Dirty Little Secrets. 2 p.m. I stood in the hallway, sweat beading at my hairline, my hands already aching from carrying the bags and boxes to the back. I'd been busting my butt for over 3 hours now, and the place didn't look any different. My eyes fell on the stacks of newspapers that still reached to the ceiling and the mountains of clothes and bags I hadn't even had time to touch. The kitchen still reeked of garbage and rot, and the paths were no wider than when I'd started. How much would I be able to do in 2 days? It's not going to work. That thought began to play over and over again in my head, pounding in my ears like I'd just run a mile. My stomach started to turn as I let the wave crash over me. I thought about giving up. It would be so easy to walk outside and dial 3 little numbers and end all this craziness. That would be the easy way out now, but what about later? What about tomorrow when I had to look at Kaylee and her parents and see the disgust on their faces? When I had to see the pity replace anything positive in Josh's eyes? Phil had just moved out and gotten a normal life a couple of years ago. Could I really take it away from him? I took a deep breath and forced myself to think about the house the way it could be after. I could replace the peeling gray paint with a fresh coat that would make it look almost new. We could fix it up real nice, replacing the lingering stink with fresh flowers on the table every week. I could feel my heart rate stop racing and my breathing slow. Thinking about the life I was going to have after was better than Valium for calming me down. Giving up wasn't an option. Repeating that to myself was the only way I was going to get through this. Giving up was not an option. Opening my eyes, I realized I'd been going about this completely the wrong way. Nobody cleaned a mess this big by picking up one little piece at a time and separating it into this pile or that bag. Aunt Jean hadn't worried about recycling. She'd even resorted to a shovel at one point as we filled up the dumpster. I had to stop seeing each little thing individually and start seeing it as one giant thing that stood between me and the rest of my life. Aunt Jean was right. A shovel was the only tool for this job. Thanks to Mom's collecting, we had happened to have several out by the shed in the back. I dragged the green trash can into the house and set it up with a bag in a small, clear spot on the living room floor. Even though I knew Mom was gone, it was really hard to believe she wasn't going to burst through the front door and start screaming at me for touching her stuff. She wasn't going to tell me that I never helped her and that she worked too hard to have time for stupid things like cleaning the house. I jammed the stuff as far down into the plastic bags as I could, poking and punching at the clothes, papers, and scraps of fabric she valued more than she valued any of us. Before I realized it, I had 4 bags full of junk that needed to go outside. 4 was about the upper limit for the number of bags I could stack around the recliner before they took up all the available space. When I checked out the people in the front door, there was only an odd couple shuffling down the street. I tried to think about how many trips I'd take into the backyard today. It had to be at least 8 or 9. In an hour or 2, people were going to start coming home from work, and the street was going to get a lot busier. I stepped away from the front door and tried to figure out another way to get this done. The hallway was still too cluttered to drag bags or boxes through, but if I continued to cart things out the front door and around the side of the house, people might get suspicious. It was getting colder in the living room, so I grabbed my jacket off the door and put it back on while I thought. Leaving the windows open in the back of the house was going to be good for keeping Mom cold, but I was going to freeze in here tonight. The windows. That was it. I grabbed one of the bags and dragged it through the living room and into the dining room. The window in that room was blocked by a small pile of boxes and bags that reached just past the windowsill. I didn't bother clearing any of it away, but just stood on top of the pile and undid the latch. Like the rest of the house, the windows were old, and this one probably hadn't been opened in years. Part of it was held shut with paint, but I banged on the top of the frame until it began to inch up little by little. When I finally had the window open wide enough, I stuck my head out to see what was down below. There were a few old plastic milk crates stacked against the house. I balanced the full garbage bag on the ledge and, with a shove, sent it flying out the window where it bounced off a crate and settled onto the ground. This was the perfect solution. Not only would it save me from having to haul all this stuff out the front door for the world to see, but I could keep everything right here on the side of the house until they took Mom away. Now it was like my body was on autopilot. All of my energy was concentrated into grabbing whatever was on top of the closest stack and shoving it as far down into the trash bag as it would go. Grab a handful, shove it in the bag. Bag after bag, pile after pile. I felt like I was finally making progress. Halfway down one pile, I found what at first looked to be a large box covered with a hot pink towel. When I hit it with the back of my hand, it sounded like metal clinging together, and I realized it wasn't a box. I could see the ridges under the towel that made it lie in waves along the top. Even before I pulled the towel off, the faint smell of cedar chips told me what it was, and it made me a little sad all over again. I hadn't seen the hamster cage since ninth grade. Make sure you feed him this week, I said to Mom as I set Petey's cage down in a cleared spot on the kitchen counter. He likes sunflower seeds and these green pellets, also little bits of apple and peanuts at night. Petey was curled up in a ball on his mound of cedar shavings. Every morning he'd spent getting the mound just right so he could turn around 3 times and snuggle into it with just one ear showing. He eats better than I do, Mom said. She poked a finger in through the bars and wiggled it around. Here, Petey. He doesn't like it when you do that, I said to her. I was already annoyed. She never made anything easy. How do you know what he likes? She asked. She waggled her finger at him one more time. Since when did you start speaking hamster? It scares him, I said. Look, he's curling up tighter and digging in the shavings. That means he's scared. Maybe you don't handle him enough, she said. Otherwise, he wouldn't be such a scaredy hamster. She pulled her finger out of the cage and stood up straight to look at me. Don't pick him up while I'm gone, okay? It's only 2 weeks. He'll be fine. Just feed him twice a day and make sure he has enough water in the bottle. I'll clean the cage when I get back. I wished I could have taken him to camp with me, but it would have been too hard to explain to the other junior counselors why I couldn't leave him at home. All Mom had to do was shove some food in his cage, and with it sitting in the middle of the kitchen, there was no way she could forget. I just kept telling myself he'd be fine. Don't worry about your precious rodent, she said. I'll feed him every day. He'll be fat and happy when you get home, you'll see. It didn't work out exactly that way. Where's Petey? I said as I dropped my suitcase on the kitchen floor, a pile of junk milling the space on the counter where the cage had been. Oh, Mom said, looking down at the newspaper she was holding. I was going to call you, but I didn't want to ruin your trip. He got out the other day when I was feeding him. I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find him. What do you mean he got out? My eyes searched what I could see of the floor. A tiny hamster could be hiding anywhere in this house. All you had to do was feed him. You said he'd be okay. She put her arm around my shoulders and gave a quick squeeze. I'm really sorry, she said. She was looking everywhere except right at me. I only left the door open for a second as so I could cut more apple, and when I looked back, he was gone. He really ran away? She nodded. I'm sure he's around here somewhere. Probably found a nice soft corner to curl up in. But he was counting on me. Petey was the first thing I'd ever been in charge of, and I'd let him down. He must have missed being held and stroked on the very top of his head. He must have thought I was never coming back. He had made his escape when he saw an opportunity. A sick, heavy feeling settled in my stomach and made the back of my eyelids prickle. I got down on all fours and looked under the table and along the wall. Here, Petey. I made little kissy noises as I was calling him. Here, Petey, I'm back. Here, Petey. Mom got down on the floor and together we searched everywhere we could, spending the next hour at hamster level trying to find him, but we never did. Sometimes I would see hamster droppings on the counter or the table, and I took it as his way of telling me he was still somewhere in the house, curled up safe in a little nest he'd made for himself, only coming out at night to look for food. I'd leave a pile of peanuts on the counter for him, and little by little it would vanish, so at least I knew he was eating something. The sharp smell from the cedar shavings in his cage brought everything back I'd felt that day when I'd come home to discover him gone. Mom must have put the cage back in here in case we ever got another hamster, but of course we never did. It didn't seem right bringing another living thing into this house when I couldn't even manage to keep Petey safe. The water bottle was still secured to the side of the cage, but it had been dry a long time. I carried the whole thing over to the wall where the green bins were stacked. Even if Petey was long gone, the cage was still good. Maybe when all this was over, I'd get another hamster or clean it out and give it to TJ. He was about the right age for a pet. As I set down the cage on the bins, I spotted something sticking out from under the cedar chips. I shook the cage so the chips settled and I could see it better, sticking my face right up to the bars to get a good look. He wasn't curled up in a ball, but lying out straight under a thin layer of cedar chips. The skin looked dry and papery, but still had a few tufts of brown hair clinging to it. Petey. "Oh, God," I said. I looked closer to make sure, but there was really no doubt. Petey hadn't escaped at all. He had died right in this cage while I was gone, and instead of doing something normal like burying him, or even telling me the truth, Mom must have covered up the cage and left it in the dining room like it never happened. That was her solution to everything. Cover it up like it never happened. My mind raced as I backed away from the cage containing the mummified remains of my only pet. How could she? I whispered. She probably forgot about him completely, didn't feed him or even give him water. Petey trusted me and I'd totally let him down. Without even thinking about it, I opened the top of the cage and gently wrapped him in the towel. He wasn't much more than dried skin and bones by now, but the least I could do was give him a decent burial. Grabbing the shovel, I headed outside, not caring who saw me. On the side of the house, just under my window, was a sheltered spot next to a spindly hydrangea bush. The cold ground was hard as I stabbed at it with the shovel, but after breaking through the top layer, I was able to dig a small hole. When the hole was deep enough, I leaned the shovel against the wall and knelt down as I lowered the pink towel into it. Tucking the edges of the towel around Petey, I waited for thoughts to come. Something about how I was sorry I'd left him alone, and how I'd do it differently if I had it to do again. I wished for something profound to give him a dignified send-off, but my mind just felt blank and empty. Slowly, I got up and dumped dirt back on top of him, scraping the shovel on the walkway as I scooped it up over and over again until the pink towel was gone. When I was done, I patted the dirt down with the back of the shovel and looked at the smooth ground where my first and only pet was buried. Unless you knew, you'd never guess he was here, but maybe it would make me feel a little better when the bush bloomed with the huge pink flowers in the spring and reminded me that Petey was in a better place.